In this lesson, we are going to be converting fractions to percents. So if you have your notes, here we can look at this. A percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. So a percent is always with a denominator of 100. So to write a percent as a fraction, we can express it with a fraction with a denominator of 100. In other words, if you can rewrite the fraction with a denominator of 100, then whatever number is in the numerator is the percent. Okay, so if we write 60% as a fraction, the percent is always out of 100. So we always write 60 100ths. Now, as a fraction, we want it in simplest form. So now we're going to simplify it. Both of these numbers are divisible by 20. And if we divide both of them by 20, we would get 3/5. So a percent is always written over 100, and then you simplify. Okay, so let's look at this. There it is again. There's your 60 over 100, which is 3/5. Okay, 40%. So what we do is we take the percent and we're going to write it with the denominator of 100. So to do that, it would be 40 100ths. Always is going to be over 100. 100 is always going to be the denominator. Now we just simplify it. Both of these numbers are divisible again by 20. And when you divide both of those by 20, you get 2/5. 12.5% as a fraction. Well, first of all, let's write 12.5 without a fraction. A half is the same thing. If you remember correctly, a half is the same thing as 5/10. These are equivalent to each other because 1 divided by 2 equals 5/10. So 12.5 would be the same thing as 12 5/10. And we're going to write that over 100. Now, we cannot have a decimal in the numerator. So when we wrote 12.5 as 12 5/10 over 100, you notice that we have a decimal in the numerator. So in order to get rid of the decimal, if we take the number 12 5/10 and we multiply it times 10, as we showed right here, every time you multiply it times a multiple of 10, you're going to move the decimal over however many zeros there are. Since we're multiplying by 10, there's 1 0. That moves the decimal over one place. So instead of having 12 5/10, now we have 125. But whatever you do to the numerator, you have to also do to the denominator. So in order to get rid of this decimal, we're multiplying times 10, which moves the decimal over one place. So that would be 125. That means that we have to move the decimal on 100 over one place. But where is the decimal? It is at the end. So if we move the decimal over one place, you're just adding another 0. 100 times 10 is 1,000. So if you have a decimal, you have to get rid of the decimal before you simplify. Now we have 125ths, 1,000ths, and both of those are divisible by 125, and that would be 1/8. Okay, so let's practice that again. Here we have 8/10% as a fraction. So we can just write that, 8/10. We can always write the percent over 100. It always gets written over 100. But now the first rule is that we can't have a decimal in the numerator. So if we move this over one place, that's the same thing as multiplying times 10. And we move the decimal over here one place by adding a 0. That's the same thing as multiplying times 10. You would now have 8 1,000ths. So we got rid of the decimal. Multiplying both by 10 or moving the decimal over once would give us 8 1,000ths. Both of those numbers are divisible by 8, and that would be 1 125ths. Okay, 2/10. Again, you always take the percent, and write it over 100. Again, we have a decimal in the numerator. We need to get rid of the decimal. So we're going to move that decimal over one place, which is multiplying times 10. So we're going to move the decimal over here, or add a 0 here, which is multiplying it times 10. And now you have 2,000ths. 2 over 1,000. 2 100,000ths. Now we can simplify. Both of those are divisible by 2, and that would be 1/500. Okay, again, we have a fraction right here, so we need to convert this to a decimal. 3/4, if you take your calculator, if you don't know that mentally, take your calculator. 3 divided by 4 is 75/100. 3/4 out of a dollar. So 20 and 3/4% would be the same thing as 20 and 75/100. Always write it over 100. Now again, we have this decimal in the numerator. This time we're going to have to move it over 2 places, which means we're multiplying it by 100, which has 2 zeros. So we have to multiply the bottom times 100 or add 2 zeros. So this is moving the decimal over 2 places. So that would give us 2,075. Let me rewrite that here. I did it as an improper fraction there, but I like it better this way. 20 and 75/100. 100. Move the decimal over 2 places. That would give you 2,075. Add 2 zeros. That would give you 10 thousandths. And now you can simplify it, and it would be 83/400. Now, if you don't want to do it the other way, like this PowerPoint shows here, instead of making that into 20 and 75/100, you can make this into an improper fraction by multiplying 20 times 4, which is 80, plus 3 is 8, so it's 83/4. And all this, with this fraction bar right here, this says divided by. So if you write that as a improper fraction, you are saying 83/4 divided by 100, and you can do it that way. So you would keep the first fraction, flip the second fraction, and you could do it that way. Either way works, but some people don't like to deal with improper fractions. Write 175% as a fraction. Again, you always take the percent and you always write it over 100. Both of these numbers are divisible by 25. So how many quarters would be in $1.75 and how many quarters would be in a dollar? That would be 7/4. You can leave it as the simplified improper fraction is 7/4, or you can turn it into a mixed number, 1 3/4. Write 150% as a fraction. Again, we take the percent, we write it over 100. Always write it over 100. Both of those numbers are divisible by 50, so that would be 3/2. I got 6/4, so I didn't divide by 50 to start out with. 6/4 is the same thing as 3/2. And you can simplify that down to 1 1/2. If you are doing our assignment on workbook page 79, these are the first 4 problems. So here's an example of what you'll be doing. 55%, you always take the percent, write it over 100, and then you simplify. Both of these happen to be divisible by 5. So if I divide the numerator by 5, that gives me 11. If I divide the denominator by 5, that gives me 20. So the answer is 11/20. 2%, you always take the percent and write it over 100. Both of these are divisible by 2, so now we simplify. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 100 divided by 2 is 50. So your answer is 1/50. 5.5%. So we have 5 5/10 and 100 as our denominator. We do not want a decimal in our numerator, so we move the decimal over 1 place. That gives us 55. We move the decimal over 1 place, which adds a 0 down here. So we have 55/1000. Both of these are divisible by 5. So that would be 11 2/100. And the last one, 30%. You take 30 and you write it over 100. Both of these are divisible by 3. If you divide the numerator by 3, that would be 10. Oops, sorry. They're not both divisible by 3. My mistake. Divisible by 10. Oopsie. 30 divided by 10 is 3. 100 divided by 10 is 10. So the answer is 3/10. So there's some examples from your assignment today. Now we're going to take the fraction and write it as a percent. Well, remember that we need a denominator of 100 because with a percent, the denominator is always 100. So we have the fraction 1/4, but we want to have a denominator of 100. So you need to rewrite this fraction. So if you can do it, you can ask yourself, what number do I multiply 4 by to get 100, which is 25. So I multiply the top number also by 25, and that would give me 25 100ths. If you cannot do that mentally, you're going to have to use our proportion trick where we do our butterflies, and you have 1 times 100 on one side and 4 times x on the other, if you remember our proportion lesson that we did. And now you divide both sides by 4, and you would get 25. But this one we can do mentally. So it would be 25 hundredths. Once you have it written over 100, this is the percent. So that is your goal, is to get it over 100, and then the numerator is the percent. So that is just going to be 25%. 6/5. Okay, again, I want the denominator to be 100. So what do I multiply 5 by to get 100? It's 20. So I have to multiply the top times 20, and that would be 120. Once you get it over 100, this is your percent, and it's going to be 120%. Now, how would you do that with the proportion method? If you didn't, you could do 6/5. You want it over 100. You would multiply this butterfly wing, which is 600, on one side of the equal sign, and on this side you have 5x, and then you divide both sides by 5, and you would find out that the missing number is 120, and that tells you the percent, which is right up here. So that is showing you how to do it with the proportion method. But once you have it over 100, you have the percent. 7/2. Can I make that with a denominator of 100? I can by multiplying times 50. So I have to multiply the numerator by 50, which is 350. Once you have it over 100, that is the percent. So that would be 350%. Here's an example. On her science quiz, Jacinda got 14 questions correct out of 16. So I set that up as a ratio right here, 14 to 16. Find her grade as a percent. Well, when you do a grade, you're always doing it. Again, a percent is always over 100. So we want to rewrite that with 100. Now here's an example of a problem where there is not a number that we can multiply 16 by to get 100. So we can't do it that way. We're going to have to use the proportion method. So we have 14 times 100, which means it's the number 14. Add 2 zeros, which is 1400. And then we have 16x. And now to solve for x, we divide both sides by 16. If you don't know that, you can do that with your calculator. And 101,400 divided by 16 would be 87.5%. So sometimes you have to use the proportion method because there is not a number that you can multiply the denominator by to get 100, and it has to be 100. Caitlin has practiced playing the piano 5 out of the last 7 days. So 5 to 7 was set up as a ratio. What percent is this? Again, the percent has to be over 100. So we set up our second ratio as a fraction with 100 on the bottom. Again, there is not a number that we can multiply 8 by to get 100. So we're going to have to use the proportion method. 5 times 100 is 500. That's on one side of the equal sign. This one would be 8x, and now we divide both sides by 8. And if you want to, you can use your calculator for that. 500 divided by 8 would be 62.5%, or 62.5%. If you're looking at your workbook page, this is number 17 through 20. So here we have 3/5. I know I have to have a denominator of 100. I know that I can multiply 50 times 20 to get 100, so I multiply the top times 20. 3 times 20 is 60. Once you have it over 100, that is your percent. So my answer is 60%. Again, 20, I know that I can multiply 20 times 5 to get 100. So I multiply the top times 5. Now I have it over 100, so that is my percent, 55%. 1/4, again, I know that I can multiply 4 times 25 to get 100. So now I multiply the top times 25, and I would have 25%. 5/8. There is not a number that I can multiply 8 by to get 100. So this is the one I'm going to have to use the proportion method for. So first I go 5 times 100, which is 500. That's on one side of the equal sign. The other side is 8x. And I divide both sides by 8. And that is where, I think we just did that one. Come back up for a second. Did we just do that one? We did. It was right there, 5/8. So I know that's going to be, you can use your calculator, 500 divided by 8, and that was 62.5%, or 62.5%. So I hope this helps you converting fractions to percents and percents to fractions.